Start. Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 15. If you want to write any questions, I will remind you, please go to meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. You have an anonymous forum where you can write anything you like. No censorship, total anonymity, total confidentiality. If you want to write to me personally, please write to me at Simon, it's my name, at meaningfullife.com, which will directly go to my inbox and I can address. I'm saying that because there have been many requests exactly how to contact and how different ways that we can communicate. I thank you again for your comments, for your encouragement, and for your participation in what has become for me a very personally, I can even say revolutionary series of interactions, of really seeing how Chassidus, that the Rebbe's poured out their hearts and souls, is being applied to people's lives, being taken seriously. And just from the questions and from feedback, I mean, what more can we say, giving nachas to the Rabbeim, that what they gave their lives for is being used as it was intended. Obviously, there's much more to go, and we all are responsible to share. So I encourage all of us, in each in our own way, in our sphere of influence, to allow people to ask their questions, offer friendship, offer a sympathetic ear, an ability for people to speak to you. As I've discussed in previous episodes, the Rebbe's directive about mashpiyim, that each of us in our own right, each of us in our own particular circle, even if it's only one person, can make a major difference and a major influence on each other's lives. And at the end of the day, it's a ripple effect. When people of different walks of life, grassroots, each in our own way, take an initiative, are proactive, and not just are quote-unquote observant Jews observing others, but rather take initiative and as I said, proactive is the healthiest and best way to most issues. The best defense is offense. With that said, as a short introduction, let me begin by following up one of the questions asked to me after previous episodes where we addressed honoring parents who don't seem to deserve honor and abuse and so on. So there have been a number of comments and questions, but one that stands out I'd like to address before we go into some new topics. Regarding your discussion about abused children, I value and appreciate these shiurim episodes tremendously. However, since you are not sure if the parents are listening, but surely the children who wrote to you are listening, isn't it important to warn them to speak to a relative, aunt, uncle, or a rav, some adult, in order to protect the siblings and not to keep it quiet? I feel you touched upon it too briefly for the children. Well, this MyLife Chassidus Applied, even though it's universal for everyone, I assume very young children are probably not listening. If they are, then hopefully it helps them. But depending who you're talking about as children, there's no question, I believe both children and parents are listening to this, and hopefully everybody can fit the hat, as the story of the Tzemach Tzedek goes, that fits them accordingly. But I will say the following. Obviously, in an abusive situation, if you're a family member, a child, who's not maybe an adult now, and your siblings that are still in the line of fire, obviously if you're a responsible person, you should not just ignore it and do whatever is possible to help protect your own family, your own siblings. It's easier said than done because we're dealing here with parents, and I can't really talk about this in a very general way. Every case is different. If it's extreme danger, obviously you take extreme measures. If it's something that's subtler that can be addressed, and if you're an adult and the parents are simply not capable to change their ways and they continue to be abusive, then you have to talk to professionals, you have to talk to a rav, you have to find somebody that you can speak to, and definitely not let innocent people be hurt. That goes without saying. I don't think you need me to come to tell you that. At the same time, using more a Chassidish approach, the bottom line, what Chassidus teaches us, as I've discussed many times, is that each of us has a soul, we have a God that's with us, and that if we apply ourselves, we can deal with any given situation. Chassidus also talks about our responsibility, not to just stand on the sidelines, but to take some active role. Number 3 is that each of us can dig deeper and find deeper strength in our souls. Now, addressing this particular issue, each case by case, whether you're a family member, you're witnessing abusive or inappropriate behavior, you have to look at the situation, bring in objective entities, and know that every situation can be addressed. And if some people are unhealthy or to the point they don't want to find help or look for help, that doesn't mean others have to suffer for the consequences. Know that you're empowered, know that you have the strength, and know that there's no such challenge. There's no challenge that we cannot overcome. A universal rule you find in hundreds, if not thousands of the Rebbe's letters and talks is Einem mevakesh el lefikechan. It's based on a medrash where Hashem says, I do not ask you, I do not request of you to do something that's not in your power. So no matter what challenge it is that we have some power to do something about it. We may not do what we want to do, we may not achieve what we think we have to achieve, but we have power to deal with it, we have power to heal from it, we have definitely power to get out of being in any hurtful type of situation. And I just reiterate again, a show like this can only do that much. It's about bringing ideas to the table, shining the light. At the end of the day, the challenges that many of us have are in private quarters, in enclosed environments, homes, schools, and so on. And therefore, each situation has to be addressed accordingly. To move on, some new topics that I've not addressed in the past, but are continuously reflected in many of your writing. So we've chosen several of them to address and entered some new territory. I'll go in no particular order. We'll start with the title, Unprofessionalism in Religious Organizations. So here's a few reading from a few questions that people are asking. I have secular colleagues and friends who complain about their bad experiences in dealing with religious nonprofits. They say that the people behind these organizations practice behavior that is disturbing and bordering on unethical. Lack of accountability, not living up to promises, breaking agreements. It's embarrassing and creates a real chilul Hashem. Why is this behavior acceptable? Is it because they feel less accountable since they represent a cause rather than the interests of shareholders, profit margins, etc.? What can we address? What can we say to address this issue, and what does Chassidus, the Rebbe, say about these matters? Another question. I value the idea of being Hamish, but not in the workforce. Why is it acceptable for a lot of Jewish businesses to act in ways that would never be accepted in the Olam, the Welt, in the world? There's a great deal of broken promises, unprofessional treatment of employees, mismanagement of resources, cutting corners, and unrealistic pressures and expectations. Not to mention, it seems to be acceptable to not act like a mensch. Do you have any advice on how to bring more order and structure within our businesses and organizations, or at least how to deal with people that act this way? Okay. Being that I try not to retreat from or avoid any questions, at the risk of sometimes reading a question, anyone hearing this can get the impression that for some reason in religious circles there's more corruption or more unaccountability than in secular circles. So let me just state for the record. I read the question because I'm not afraid, and we shouldn't be afraid to address any issue head on. Someone writes a question, it's a legitimate point, and let's address it. But at the same time, let's be fair. To suggest that there's perhaps more corruption in religious, or however you want to define the adjective, organizations and businesses, is absolutely wrong. I don't know the statistics, because if we knew the statistics, there wouldn't be that much corruption. Obviously, as much that is caught and as much that is known, is much more happening that is not known. It's very obvious, because not every thief is caught. When you hear about the corporate scandals in the last 10 years, what happened in 2008, whether it's the banks, whether it's Enron, whether it's this thing, that thing, you find that people are greedy by nature, people are selfish by nature, and we live in a corrupt world. Let's get that clear. And to suggest in any way this is more of a religious issue than not is absolutely wrong, and I will not buy into that, and I don't want to create any type of impression like that. Yet, when you have an issue in your community, in your home, in your life, you have to address it. It's not an excuse to say everyone's doing it. So I want to address it, and I want to address it in a certain context. The context is called Kiddush Hashem, Chil Hashem, as was mentioned. Because it's true, a person who is a godly person, who professes to be a godly person, who looks like that, has an additional responsibility of being ethical, of also making a Kiddush Hashem. Now, this doesn't get off the hook somebody who's corrupt and doesn't look like a religious person, because everyone has to be ethical, and there are laws, and there are ethics, there's menschlichkeit. But there's an added element when a person is perceived as being godly. And we see this in the Gemara. There's the story with the Tana who refused to buy meat on credit because it shouldn't appear that he's walking out of the butcher, he's walking out of the store, or it wasn't a store, however it was, he's going away from that vendor, not paying, because not everyone will know it's on credit. So he insisted to pay right away, so everyone saw clearly. We all know the story of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu, what was his biggest crime, his only crime? Was instead of speaking to the rock, he hit the rock. The first time Hashem told him, God told him, hit the rock and water will come out of it, he did it. The second time, God said, speak to the rock. When he spoke and he saw it didn't work, so for whatever reason, he changed it and said, he hit the rock. Now, between us, hitting a rock and speaking to a rock achieves the same thing. I'd like to see any of us get water out of a rock, whether we speak or we hit. So what did he do? He didn't say, no, don't tell me that a rock can't give water. Let me go to find a source of water, a sea, a river, and so on. He may have thought that I didn't hear correctly, or whatever it was. But from Moshe Rabbeinu, on the level that he was, and people looking up to him, that little change was considered a Chillul Hashem. For other people, it may have been a Kiddush Hashem, actually, because they're still believing that the hitting the rock will work. The Rebbe would bring this often, and many of our bringings, there's too many to enumerate, where he would say that when you want to be mashpi, you want to influence someone else, you have to always do them twice, or much more than what you expect from another. Because it's be expected that your student, or someone that sees you as a role model, is going to say, if you do that much, I'll do 50%, whatever the number is. That's essentially the idea of a higher standard. And again, this doesn't get anyone else off the hook, and it's not in any way suggesting that there's more corruption. But we have to look at ourselves, being particularly someone that is supposed to bring a Kiddush Hashem. Like the Medrash says on the Pasuk, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. So usually interpreted, V'ahavta, to love God. But V'ahavta has another meaning, the Medrash says. That you should make Kadesh Yisaveh Al Yodcha, that you should make God beloved in the eyes of everyone that sees you. When you behave like a more refined person, when you behave a more sensitive person, kinder, compassionate, then people say, this is a godly person. This is what God wants of a person. I love God more. That's the responsibility we carry. And therefore, things are far more sensitive when it comes to a person like that in attitudes and so on. So therefore, this discussion, I haven't even addressed the issue yet, is absolutely relevant. And I want to address it, but it's important to know that. I mean, on a humorous note, they say the Jewish theory of relativity is this: 3 hairs on a person's head isn't much, but 3 hairs in the soup, if you have a piece of dust on your finger, it's not a big thing. If it's a piece of dust on your eyeball, it's very irritating. Aravav, al-bega, Talmud Chacham, the Gemara says, a blemish, or some type of imperfection on the garment of a Talmud Chacham, because a Talmud Chacham is considered a big thing. So it's a matter of kol lefi ha'adam lefi ha'mokim, which means it's relative. Kiddush Hashem is one of the only mitzvahs that is relative to the person and to the situation. Obviously, there are black and white things that are allowed, that are not allowed, but then there's, like I mentioned, relative. So when it comes to this discussion, it's very disturbing when we see in newspapers or accounts of religious people being chained or taken to prison, because look what they look like. And it gives a bad name to God and to anyone that looks that way. I can tell you personally, people meet me, cynics, secular people, and they say, oh yeah, we know you guys. You dress a certain way, but you're just as corrupt as everyone else. So this is a tremendous responsibility on every Jew to be a ner l'goyim, to be an example, a living example, and definitely not chas v'shalom, the opposite. Especially a chassid of the Rebbe. How many times the Rebbe said, you represent me, you represent Chassidus, whether you like it or not. How people look at you is how they're going to look at the Rebbe. The Rebbe once, I remember, Fabrengen, where he was very upset, Mishpotim Mem Daled, where he spoke about how people are asking him, what should they answer to people who talk about Mashiach? The Rebbe was upset that a chassid calls himself a chassid, a student of mine. How does it reflect on the teacher, on the Rebbe, that the student doesn't have an answer? So when it comes to a chassid, it comes to a shliach, a shlucha, people who consider themselves to be representatives, ambassadors of the Rebbe, this is amplified and compounded many times over. With that said, then we do have to address this issue. Not because the problem is necessarily more existent in this world than in other worlds, but because it's a problem that deals with an issue that people have issues with. So let's set things straight. There's a Torah, there's a Shulchan Aruch that talks about what is ethical, what is not ethical. No one is immune, no one is absolved of these laws. There's no exceptions. Across the board. A person has a shaila, if a suffix, a doubt, ask a Rav. These are things that the Rebbe has written in letters. It's interesting the Rebbe had to write that because sometimes the obvious has to be stated. So I'm stating the obvious, which is not just my words, it's basically based on Torah. But in case you need beside discussions, the Rebbe also says it. Not that you need the Rebbe to tell you to look at Shulchan Aruch, but to just state for the record, there's no such thing as because of Chassidus or because of the Fnimishur Sadin or because you have a deeper kavanah, higher kavanah, you are absolved from commitments that are Torah-based ethics. Masa matan ba'amuna. That's number one. Especially, as I mentioned, the issue of Kiddush Hashem Chilul Hashem. As far as why this is the case, yes, many people, many business people will not invest, don't want to give charity, or don't want to give enough money to non-profits because they claim that accountability is very weak. Because how do you measure? How do you measure success? It's spiritual success. In business, you measure it. Did you sell as much as you estimated you would? Did you reach your projections? Did you not? Is my investment giving a return or not giving a return? When it comes to spiritual return, how do you measure it? 10 souls. It's all quality. So yes, there is a tendency that many people, there's a impression out there that non-profits are less accountable. And this is across the board, Jewish or not Jewish. Many non-profits have tried to re-engineer their institutions to be more accountable and more transparent. From the Rebbe's point of view, there's no question that he always wanted it to be that way. In Tov Shemem Daled, the week of Parsha Pekudei, an organization that wrote to the Rebbe, they're incorporating, and they asked the Rebbe permission, a blessing, and so on. And the Rebbe responded, and said, that when you incorporate, you should establish a Vad Kaspi, a financial committee, financial board, va'aleim Vad Bikedes, and above them, an auditing board. Shitasi, meaning it's across the border rule. It wasn't a Hirah Shah or to one individual. And then he added, Parsha Pekudei. That Parsha Pekudei, Tov Shem Mem Dalet, that's what the Rebbe addressed. He spoke about Eila Pekudei Mishkan, that Moshe Rabbeinu gave accountability for every penny. Well, there wasn't a penny then, but every piece of gold, silver, copper, all the other materials that were used in the Mishkan. And it's detailed in Parsha Pekudei. After it was all built, after it was all first of all commanded, after it was all built, the Parsha Torah meticulously and takes the patience to spell out how he gave an accounting for everything. The Rebbe asked the question, to every word in Torah is mediyuk. Could have just said Moshe did what he used everything that they gave him. Why the need to tell us about Moshe's accountability? And more importantly, Moshe's Reya Neman, Evad Neman. He was the faithful servant, the faithful shepherd. He was trusted with the Torah itself. Remember, there was no one with Moshe up on Har Sinai. Moshe came down with God's word. Trusted by God, trusted by the people. People may have had times, but no one had a question. Moses was beyond reproach, beyond question, a faithful person. Why does he need to give an accountability of every penny? And the Rebbe's response was twofold. First of all, it's not his money. Since his mom and Sibur that came from the public, Vayichli Truma, everybody contributed. Simple thing. They contributed. You have to tell them what you did with it. It has nothing to do about fate, whether you're trusted or not trusted. That's number one. Basic mental kind of relationship. Number two, Adam chas al mamene. A person cares about his own mom, and everyone, this rule applies to everyone, which means someone else's money, even subtle, Moshe is still Moshe, somewhere, because he's still a self, may not be quite as accountable, being that it's not his own. That's what the Rebbe said. Means every human being, even a Moshe Rabbeinu, has to be accountable and transparent. And the Rebbe said, then he repeated the lesson about Mezdis and so on. So for sure, organizations. Now many organizations say, one second, I deal with balabatim, I deal with people, I don't need them messing around with my books, I don't need them complaining and starting to say, how'd you spend this and how'd you spend that and who got that money and so on. I don't want them in my hair, so to speak. So how could I invite people to Vad Kaspi? It'll be me, my wife, and my oldest son. Okay, the name may all be the same, so we'll find a cousin or someone that is not going to care. Well, the fact of the matter is, and you can ask people who have done this, who run organizations, yes, you have to be careful to find people you trust, But the more transparency causes more success because people trust more. And yes, don't find somebody who's just going to meddle and just going to try to make your life miserable. I would not bring somebody who just doesn't want to give anything and just wants to see your books. But on the other hand, to have trustworthy people adds a tremendous amount of credibility and is hatzlacha in business. And the Rebbe has written this in a number of letters to different people. So the idea of being accountable is not just the menschliche thing to do and the right thing to do. It actually could be the most successful thing to do. However, some people are not necessarily trained. They haven't been educated in the best practices of accountability and even what accounting is. So they do things to shoot from the hip and do things in a Chassidus Shemalav Malka fashion. But, responsibility of a Mesid includes being responsible for its greatest success. And who knows how much more successful it could be if we behave that way. Then there's other issues. I discussed this in previous episodes, the Sikha from Vayeshev, Tov Shem Mem Aleph, where the Rebbe speaks about organizations being their own worst enemies, where heads of organizations don't want to let anyone else, giving them any type of strength or power, and therefore undermine their own success. So I'm not going to go over that. So bottom line is, it's unacceptable. We don't accept it. The fact that people do it is either due to lack of training, recklessness, and just plain inappropriate behavior. So yes, in Amazeus, we have to be even more accountable than the rest of the world. And I qualify again, this doesn't mean the rest of the world is in great shape. Everybody's doing what they want to do. They may know how to cover it up better, etc. And you see this every day. This bank announces this. Bank of America now announcing a $4 billion accounting mistake. That's not a nonprofit. How that's possible is another discussion. And then other things, that come up here and there, and it's not just here and there, almost on a daily basis. But the bottom line, when we're addressing it on our own, we have higher standards and ethics, and absolutely being a Mesid that is representing a cause makes you even more responsible to behave inconsistent with what that cause would be like. And if you want accountability, look at the Rebbe's own Meses and how the Rebbe ran clearly with Rabbi Chadikov, who many complained was maybe too strict. But one thing for sure, there's no accusations of corruption or skimming or kickbacks, etc., etc. So, enough said on this topic. And regarding professionalism, it goes hand in hand as well. Professionalism means how you treat workers. Well, a promise is a promise. Unfortunately, some people are very lax with this. And the excuse is because we represent a higher cause, everybody can be forgiven for certain... No. A Mesid has to be higher standards than even a company and a corporation. And if your cause is a good one, why is the behavior in the organization not consistent with that cause? So one has to wonder, is this really dedication by the leaders of this organization to the cause or to themselves? And they use the cause as, so to speak, a front. So this is something to be addressed as well. And I'm just briefly stating that here too there are standards. And the Rebbe is the best example. Are we all perfect? We can make mistakes. But it's critical to have an environment at work to be accountable. A promise is a promise. Something, you make a mistake, be straightforward with your employee, call them in, say, here's the story, and not create situations with his animosity and so on. In the corporate world, we know bosses play workers against each other. Is this acceptable in a Mesid of a Mesid, a holy Mesid? To do something like that undermines the whole spirit of the Mesid. That human beings are weak and we all have our mistakes, yes. But I think it's important if you're running an organization or you're working for one to think about it. And obviously, if good is better, not better, we have to always look at improving and making sure that the Kiddush Hashem, Chilul Hashem, should be preserved in the best possible way and not wait to get caught and then say, okay, to do this in a way, the proper way, so you don't have to deal with the fallout that may come, God forbid, should it not be done the right way. We move right on to teachers and leadership. Another sensitive topic, the critique of our leadership. It somewhat follows what we've discussed, and I'll just read. I didn't choose the harshest letters. I know that may be more sensational, but I'd rather chose letters that are more focused on something that's a little more productive, because I've received some scathing and very biting and very, very aggressive letters about corruption and specifics and so on. Here's a questioner. I've been around for many years, and frankly, my faith in leadership has disappeared almost completely. No one is leading because they truly care about us and the well-being of our community. Instead, the scene is fraught with selfishness, ego, personal motives, politics, and maliciousness toward each other. I know you may be wondering, how does it get worse than this? Trust me. How are we supposed to look up to these people, and how can we move forward? Can we move forward toward promoting a new type of community leader with values, midas, and a lifestyle we can admire, respect, and trust? Okay, this is like the $1,000,000 question. Another questioner asks, I'm a Baal Tshuva for many years, raising my family of many young children, Kenan Hara, in the system. It is completely shocking and discouraging to see what is going on with the leadership in our community, particularly in the area of halacha, tznius, and so on. So here's a person who's criticizing the levels of tznius, meaning not tznius dikanov by teachers and rebbetzins and mashpiyas. I'm not going to read all the explicit details here. I have attempted to address this issue with school administration and have done so numerous times, and the response I get is that there's no way to change these leaders through rules, etc. How can that be? And where are the spouses and where are the leaders? I've been told they don't notice. However, I find it quite hard to believe. Can you please address this issue? So I chose two extremes. Well, it's not really two extremes. One, general corruption, no respect for the leaders, and two, a specific thing. First of all, let me begin in general with something to say about critique. I just heard, just a day ago, someone told me this story, a beautiful little story. There's a little child. It was on Pesach, and he saw children throwing nuts at the birds. We play with these filberts and these different type of, in front of 770 and other places, throwing nuts at the birds. Being a naive little child, the Rebbe comes out of 770. He ran over to the Rebbe. And he says to the Rebbe, the children are throwing nuts at the birds. It's a type of mesira, so to speak. He's informing on them. The Rebbe looked at him and said, with a broad smile, he said to him, Azevi de Kinder bei Kriyas Yamsuf was geworfen Eplach zu der Fegelach und gesagt Shiras Hayam. Like the children by Kriyas Yamsuf. So it's known, when the sea parted, the Medrash talks about how the children, the trees were there, the children took apples and other fruit and threw it to the birds, and said Shiras Hayam, said the song of the sea, the praise of the sea that we said in Shvir Shal Pesach. We know the custom of Parsha B'Shalach to throw kasha. It's a whole story with the Maral. Not for now. The idea of emulating what the children did. So here was a child in his innocence trying to criticize, trying to tell the Rebbe, look at the throwing stones and nuts at filberts at birds, and look at the Rebbe's response. Generally speaking, when critique was presented to the Rebbe, even if it was legitimate critique, rarely did the Rebbe just say, okay, let me see what I can do. I've heard this a number of times. There was a woman in the community, not living in this community, in Montreal. By the Rebbe, she started complaining about how Bochum smoke, they do other things. And the Rebbe said, you're talking about my children? When people criticized other things to the Rebbe, same approach. Critique was not something the Rebbe took lightly. Now, mind you, afterwards, he may have said, you're talking about my children, then the Rebbe may call in the Anhola, the faculty, and give them over their head to make sure to correct the situation. What is the meaning? Why did the Rebbe just give the person the satisfaction that critique is good? Because the Rebbe was very wary, as we all should be. When it comes to critique, where is it coming from? You may be criticizing good critique, but as I mentioned a number of episodes back, from Mitzvah Big Day Kuhuna and Terech Mitzvah Secha, he talks about wearing too long of garments that you can slip on. And Naveda, he says, sometimes you stand in line to punish someone. It may be legitimate punishment. The person may deserve it, but why are you online? Why did you choose to become a shliach for negative things? So before we criticize, we have to question ourselves, what position? Did you look at yourself in the mirror? Are you subjecting yourself to the same critique and openness to others? So critique feeds often into the lowest common denominator among us, to just criticize others, either to feel better because we're about ourselves, or just because we like that others shouldn't succeed, and so on. So even if it's legitimate critique, there's a Chassidish way, there's an approach from Torah that we see it from the Rabbeim. There's a way to do it in a discreet way, in a way that you have to guarantee that it's not about your agenda. It's very easy to start looking. You look anywhere, you can tear anything down. What? To promote some agenda. You see this all the time. And a gay bedover, he will find critique in anything he has interest in undermining. And you'll find that you show me a person, you show me an organization, you show me an individual that can be criticized. Everybody can be criticized. So if you're truly constructive critique, as we call it, then you have to find the right way to say it, not just what to say, the right way to the right people. Lashon hara is something we all can fall into. So this is a general comment about critique. This, at the same time, goes back to the issue of that doesn't mean that there isn't legitimate things to criticize. Like I said before with organizations, they may be corruption, but to start saying that here's a corruption, so we have to also now address the issue itself. Like the guy that said, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean no one wants to get me. Just because some criticizers are wrong in the critique, in the sense their intentions are wrong, doesn't mean there isn't something to criticize. So now let's address the issue of leadership. I don't have a magic pill or answer to this question. You know, what we have is what the Rabbeim gave us. We have Chassidus, we have Torah. Torah they gave us at Har Sinai. The Torah knew fully well. Chassidus knows fully well. The Rabbeim knew fully well that people can sometimes fall to the lowest possible common denominator. And yes, the word leaders has gotten a very bad name, whether it's Rabbonim or others, due to machlekes, to disagreements, to pettiness, and just a bad taste in many people's minds. Now you could say it's all false, that all the people are wrong. But when there's an impression like that, a true leader takes it to heart. Now maybe in the political Washington system, they only take it to heart because their polls are falling. By Torah people, we hope you take it to heart because Kabul Samis Misha Amre, and we have to look at ourselves as leaders. If people feel that they have no one to turn to, there's no one to be proud of, there's no one that's a role model, there's no one that understands, we got a problem. Cynics used to say there's a Medrash Hanelim, quote unquote, meaning a hidden Medrash that no one has yet found, that after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, after the second temple was destroyed, so a lot of things were lost, and one of them is that leaders with Seichel were not Yirei Shamayim, and leaders with Yirei Shamayim had no Seichel. It's not across the board. The cynics would say that you find sometimes people are very innocent and pure and have a lot of good intentions, but they don't have common sense. Then you have people who have common sense and are intelligent, but they're not necessarily incorruptible. So my response is the following. I just actually republished an article I wrote, How Do You Find a True Rabbi? The Torah tells us how you find a leader, a mashpia arav. I think instead of finding a collective and some type of communal answer, I think it has to be more of a personal answer. Each of us, as I said, we're not asked to do something that we don't have the strength to do. So if we're told, to appoint a mentor and find a mashpia by the Rebbe himself, it means we have the ability to do so. So I don't know if there's an answer for everybody, but every individual, collectively I meant for everybody, every of us has to find the gem that you could speak to. And if you haven't found it yet, you have to Matzasi. You have to look again, and look for references. And maybe people can refer you to someone that's good. So there's no question that you can find. I can't speak for a leader of the whole community. That Hashem sends. There's a whole Torah of the Baal Shem Tov that talks about how you should hate Rabbonists, hate leadership. If Hashem wants you to be a leader, He'll find a way. Like you see all the great leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu and the Rebbe, all resisted. True leaders don't want the job because they know what it entails and they have the humility. They're not looking for power. So what we have to do is look for somebody who fits the bill for yourself and know clearly that you have such a directive. And if you haven't found it yet, you have to find it. And not just find one of these cookie cutter models where everybody's going to some mashpia. Find somebody that speaks to your issues, understands you personally. The Rebbe never said there has to be one guy for 1,000 or one woman for 1,000 people. As I said, it could be one person. You need your Rav. You need your leader. In our day and age, we have the Gemara that says, famous Gemara. What does it mean? God did a charity that He spread the Jews out between the nations. What do you mean charity? The idea of being spread all over the world among nations is considered a curse. It's considered a punishment. Your kibbutz golius, kabetz nitchei Yisrael, is the bracha, the blessing, the end of days that God will regather. So what does the Gemara means? So one of the explanations given, I once heard the name of the Rebbe in a little different way, but the idea that when you have a world that's perfect, obviously it's great if everybody's centralized in one place, and that's Yisrael and Yerushalayim. But when it's not perfect, the tzedakah is that each community will have its strengths as its weaknesses. Instead of this corruption and it's centralized, then everybody's corrupt. Here, you could have one city, God forbid, doesn't have the proper type of leadership, the proper type of rabbonim and so on. You have another community that follows thereof. So when the body is healthy, then all the evarim of the body, the organs, all the parts of the body are also healthy. But when the body is not healthy and one part may be ailing, you want to make sure the disease does not spill over to the other parts, and therefore, every country, every city has its own rabbonim and so on, and that's how it's been established since the Sanhedrin is no longer active till Mashiach will come. So now there's local community; each will have their rabbonim. Now in each community, you could say, well, if I have a problem, that's why we have to look around, find someone you can speak to. I am not here to defend or criticize rabbonim, mashpiyim. That let others do. Not that we have to do it. We have to be productive, constructive, positive, and think in terms of how can we find what we need to fulfill our mission in this world. And focus on that. Solving the bigger problems, I don't have a solution for. Now, so I believe I answered both the critique of teachers and leaders, and as well as dealing with all the different politics and so on. Those that are immersed or they've become, unfortunately, caught up in politics and so on, they let them be as they be. God should bless them all. That they should all wake up and come to realize, as I mentioned a number of episodes back, that the true Shlema Melech test of the true mother is the one that says, you know what, I'm a vater. I'd rather give up that the baby shouldn't be cut in half than stake my claim to the child, which is my child. So true leaders, that's what they would do. There's deferring, there's humility, there's flexibility, there's yielding. Again, I'm not here to preach to anybody, but we have already, the Torah has told us what is the sign of a leader. The sign of a roya, of a true shepherd, is someone who's sensitive to the needs of the people, not to their own needs first. And Moshe Rabbeinu Hoyereya, and David Hoyereya, Moshe Hoyereya, David Hoyereya, because they were sensitive to every sheep. Now, of course, that's a rebel level, but each of us in our own small way can do the same. And above all, besides looking for a Rav or Mashpia, is also to be that way for others. You never know that you, in your small way, you don't have to be a perfect human being to be a Rav or Mashpia, can be that type of leader. So I would say, in sum, that today we have to rise and find those leaders through grassroots. We have to rise to the occasion. If we ourselves can do some leadership, can offer something, absolutely. And to dwell not on the negative of how bad things are, which could be pretty bad, and focus on what we can do about it. That's our approach, how to be masakin, how to repair, how to find a correction. And even the Rebbe would speak about those that are reitfei shalom, that there are two sides of a machlekes. This one argues, that one's arguing, comes a reidev shalom. What does he do? He chases away the peace, and he becomes also a side. So we have to also be careful from trying to get involved in reconciling unless you really know you can be direct help. And the Eibster should help us that we should have some sense of Ahavas Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael, permeated, saturated with the Rebbe's approach to these type of issues. And there's no question that we have the ability to find the leadership we need. We need, I emphasize. It may not be the perfect leadership, the leadership you and I need to forge ahead. Because there's no way that you were given a mission in this world and due to somebody else's corruption you can't achieve. You don't have to follow that person. Find somebody else. And above all, let's stay away from machlekes. Make sure in our families and homes we don't talk about these things. Focus your children on positive things, what the Rebbe wants of us, and know that everything is possible to be done and achieved. Because when we jade our children by sharing things that disappoint us and that we're resentful about, it doesn't give them a very good hope and a very good forecast of how to take on life. We should be zeicha that we shouldn't need to talk about these things, and we attack our shiva shavtayach kavadeshena, and we'll have the true leadership the way that Eibster wanted it, in the centralized way of Mashiach. We move on. Birth control and overwhelming tuition. Okay. So this is a topic we began addressing. There's a lot to talk about, the elements of education and schools. We talked about government and so on in previous. So this is moving right along. And there's a lot of issues that I'm going to address in this, including in future episodes, the issue of secular education, which has been literally one of the more
demanding questions that people are insisting that I address. Frankly, I'm doing my research. I want to give a thorough response to this, and that's incomplete, so I need still some time and research. But I will address this issue. Birth control and overwhelming tuition. Question 1. Tuition is so high for yeshivas. At this point, it seems I need to either consider going on birth control in order to provide my children with this luxury, or to be open to the possibility of sending my children to public school. Okay, question number 2. The same guard. Today in our Jewish world, we see great wealth and tremendous poverty. Some of the wealth was not gained in the most meritorious of ways, yet we don't have the leadership among our own to structure the frum community in the most economically feasible way. People are upset about over-the-top tuition obligations and are wary of the future that someday their children or grandchildren will be forced to attend public school. Interesting. 2, mention public school. I never thought I'd see that. Okay, question number 3. It's a little related, but not directly related. Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I'm not sure if this topic has already been discussed in one of your past lessons, but this is something that has been bothering me for a long time, and I think it's time to address the issue. When I got married, I was very excited and anticipated having children. When my first girl was born, despite the sleepless nights and life-altering changes, I was happy to take care of and raise my child. When the second child, a boy, was born, it too was exciting. I had less patience, but was happy to take care of and raise this child too. I loved them both more than anything. Then came the third child. The third child was, quote-unquote, unplanned. Now I know that the Rebbe was not a proponent of family planning, but the fact is that not I nor my wife was ready for this one. Frankly, despite the fact that Hashem has given us a beautiful, healthy child, I still resent the fact that I had no interest in having another child yet, and it was forced upon me. I'm reading the letter as it is, untouched. When this child cries at night or during the day, I resent every second of it, and though she doesn't say it outright, I know that my wife resents it too. The aggravation this causes us is obviously taking a toll on our shalom bayis. I'm not one who likes to dwell in the past, but looking to the future, I don't think I want to have any more children. I think that 3 children is sufficient. It's more than most American or European families have. I believe the average is 2 children there. Now, am I wrong for feeling this way? Am I wrong for feeling resentful about our unplanned, yet beautiful and healthy child? Somehow I don't feel like I'm alone in thinking this way. Thanks. Well, I wasn't very comfortable reading this, to be very honest, because, as they say, one of the reasons that they took care not to study Moreh Nevuchim, which was the God of the perplexed by the Rambam, is because you may learn a question, a very good question, and then fall asleep before the answer comes. So I want to make sure that this question doesn't stand. I understand and I totally empathize with the sincerity of these questioners and many others like them. But we have to look not to ourselves, we have to look at the Torah and Chassidus and make it practical. So I'm not going to now preach to anybody and talk about family planning and so on. But at the same time, we need to know what the Rebbe says. And we need to know that the Rabbeim and Chassidus did not come to make demands on us that are not possible for us to achieve. Now you may say, it sounds impossible. You know something? You could say that about the whole Torah too. 3,326 years ago, no one knew or that it would be possible to keep a nation following Torah and mitzvahs. It's very difficult to do mitzvahs, especially with challenges, financial challenges, oppression, and so on. One thing that Jews have shown is that they have the resilience and the power to deal with any challenge. I'll get back to that soon. But I just want to say that's why I want to address this very directly, and no way criticizing these letters, because that's not the goal here. The goal is information, to learn, to come and understand. These questions are provocative questions that make us look at ourselves and try to address them. Back in Tov Shin Mem, and I have very vivid memories of this because it was the first year I began writing Farbrengens. I was a maniach and a chayzer of the Rebbe's, and Tov Shin Mem, Chanukah, was my first formal Farbrengen that I wrote. I helped out the earlier years, but that was when I formally began writing the Farbrengens. In that summer, Sivan, Tov Shin Mem, which would be 44 years ago, coming up this time of the year, the Rebbe spoke about family planning. He began the Sikha before Shavuos to the women. He continued on Shavuos, and then the Shabbos Nosei after Shavuos, and the following weeks. A series of Farbrengens. As was customary by the Rebbe, he began a new so-called campaign or idea. He'd begin with a Farbrengen. In this case, he began speaking to the women because there was a Sikha always before Shavuos to the Neshei B'nai's convention. You can look up all these Sikhs. They speak for themselves.
They were very powerful sikhs because it was a topic the Rebbe did not ever address before quite in that fashion, definitely not so elaborate. And basically it was addressing family planning. So before we address this issue, and I say this to the people who wrote these questions and to anyone else who has similar questions, before we articulate and craft an opinion, it's most important. What did the Rebbe say? Even if you have questions about it, but you have to know what you're questioning before you question it. And I think there are many distortions, not just about this, but many other things, that unless you look inside, sometimes your questions or your skepticism or your doubts are based on nothing. They're based on hearsay. They're not what is actually said. So I'm not going to go over all the sikhs, but I will sum up a few key points. A few key points go the following. The Rebbe spoke. The Rebbe spoke about the beauty of and the gift that God gave us to have children. He spoke about the phenomenon today in America and across the world, family planning, which is a broad term that doesn't just include active birth control, which can be using different type of contraceptives, but includes also planning. There's ways you can plan. Family planning, scheduling how many children there are going to be, scheduling relationships in order to monitor that. The Rebbe addressed it head on, and it was not so usual for the Rebbe to speak so explicitly. Obviously, he didn't talk explicitly about things, but I mean the topic itself. And clearly, he was addressing not just the secular world, but also the internal community, the frum and religious and Chassidic community. The Rebbe spoke about this gift that God gave us. And one of the few things that the Rebbe said that I want to repeat here is I remember the Rebbe saying, a person is blessed with faculties, arms and legs and eyes and ears. Imagine they decide they're going to block one eye or live tied one hand behind their back. No normal person would do that. These are the faculties you've been blessed with, and you want to use them to the fullest. One of the faculties is to have children. So why would any healthy person want to stop that? So the only answer is comfort zone, my comforts. But it's a gift. And I remember the Rebbe actually saying that in the United States there's the USDA, there's the Department of that reviews all medicine and so on and pharmaceuticals. There's a whole process to get approval for any new medication. To address any type of condition, there's the whole government department that deals with that type of approval. And the Rebbe said that government institution should apply themselves to see what are the psychological impact of people who choose to have less children or no children. Because it would be like the impact of maybe you're preventing a certain faculty from actualizing itself. Who knows what kind of impact it has on you? And I remember I was taken by that because the Rebbe wasn't just saying the Torah says so. And why block the blessing of God, which was also what the Rebbe said. But he took it into a very human terms that it could actually have negative impact. And maybe in time we will discover that having children actually helps people be healthier people. Not just brings children into the world for the next generation, but actually helps people be a healthier human being. Now, the Rebbe, I don't believe, mentioned it then, but if you look in Halacha, for example, a Chaver Sanhedrin, a member of the Supreme Court in Judaism, a Kohen, Gadol, cannot be celibate, cannot be a single person. One of the reasons given, because a single person may not have the sensitivity that a parent has. And you need sensitivity when you're going to be a leader. And judging, Sanhedrin, you could say scholarship. But scholarship that's sensitive. Scholarship that comes with practical life experience. How many other things does it have an impact on us on a purely healthy level that the government should review? That's what the Rebbe said. And the Rebbe talked about not just the commandment and the blessing, but he talked about the health and the welfare of us. So before we tamper with things like this, it's important to know, we may not understand. When Hashem said to Adam and Chava, I'm creating both of you, and I'm commanding you now, pru revu, it's not just a commandment. It could be, this is what makes you the healthiest people you can be. The fact that some people say, well, listen, I grew up in an unhealthy home, my parents abused me, so I don't want to bring children into this world, because I don't want to hurt them. Two wrongs don't make a right. On the contrary, learn what happened from you, make sure it don't happen again. To make that statement that I'm not going to let's say, have a relationship with someone because I was hurt in a relationship, is I understand there's a knee-jerk reaction of someone who's been hurt. But is that a healthy solution? A healthy solution is learn to do it the right way. And then the Rebbe spoke about other milas and qualities about this, the gift of God. that He gave us. Now, all you need is go speak, and I say this to the questioners, go speak to a couple that tragically and unfortunately are unable to have children. They'd be Meisa Nefesh. Chana was Meisa Nefesh for Shmuel. She went to the Beis HaMikdash. She was accused by Eli to be drunk. And then she gave birth to Shmuel. She said, I'll give this child to God if He gives me a child. The Mesiras Nefesh that women and men had for children. And you see people today suffer that they can't have a child. So when we start playing around with this and say, I'm not going to have that many because of different reasons, go visit somebody that doesn't have children and ask them what they think about children. You know, I think this is true about anything in life. We don't appreciate that we breathe every moment healthily. In this last minute I just spoke, each of us breathed around 18 times. Did you know that? Exhale and inhale. We take it for granted. You go to a hospital, God forbid, and you see someone struggling to breathe. And what happens then? What happens then? You suddenly appreciate. The last pasuk in Tehillim, Kol neshama neshama tahalal ka. Kol neshama tahalal ka. The Medrash says, Kol neshima neshima. Every breath we take, we should thank God. We don't appreciate what we have. We live in comfort zone in America and all over the world, and we have taken for granted our blessings. So I say this again, I'm not here to criticize. Everybody has their situation, financial challenges, personal challenges. I want to say to this individual that wrote, unwanted child, God forbid. It's a wanted child. God wanted you to have a child. What do you mean unwanted child? You don't want a child. You're here to decide. You decide, and who wanted you? God wanted you. I met a woman a few months ago. I was at a Shabbaton, and she said to me, she was born. Her father had left her mother before she was born. He disappeared. So she grew up with her stepfather, who was very loving. Years later, she'd been looking for her father. She finally met her father. It broke my heart what she told me. She said, I met my father. I was thinking, what a reunion. You know, the moment he'll see me, he'll run after me. You know, something I always was dreaming, where's my father? Why hasn't he come to find me? What is he going to do when he sees me the first time? And what happens? The father says to her, the first words, you were unwanted. I never wanted you, and I hated you, and you should never have been born. Tell me the impact of a father saying this to a child. She actually told me this story because she said she read Torah Meaning for Life, and it helped her to realize birth is God saying you matter. God wanted her. But still, to hear that from her father is not very pleasant. And she says every time she's pregnant, every time she deals with her own children, she remembers her father's words. And it's hard for her to have children, not because she loves her children, because she remembers those words. So Ch'mana Litzlan that a father could say something like that. Now, I'm not suggesting this writer writes, but unwanted child, your child is unwanted. If God didn't want your child, the child wouldn't be here. It didn't work according to your plans, and what does work according to your plans? When you make a certain investment in a business and suddenly it's hugely successful, and another time you make it, it's not successful, that's what's up to you. So I just want to say, what we want and we don't want is not. Take your wants and make it God's want. If you think it's not what you wanted, figure out what God wanted. If God wanted it, maybe you should want it too. Maybe it's the greatest blessing. And learn to embrace this child, because you don't want to ever, God forbid, to give an impression to this child that the child is unwanted. As far as the tuition issue, which is a broader topic, I'm not getting now into the schools and how things have changed regarding the exorbitant and the overwhelming tuitions, whether it's justified or not. Most likely not really so much. Many schools have become more like businesses. But let's talk about our end of things. That'll be another topic which I don't think I'll have time to address right now. What tuition should be like, and what should be the attitude to schools, to children, to parents that can't afford tuition, and what should the responsibility of the wealthier people regarding scholarships and so on. But regarding us, what can I say? Is there a bigger blessing in life than children? All the wealth in the world is worthless if you don't have children. So, and we say that with every child, God sends wealth. That's what the Rebbe said back in Tov Shin Mem in those talks. Every child brings wealth. I see families that are large families, and they've struggled. And yet, the love, when it's healthy, is unbelievable. Now, if someone will say, well, listen, I'm bringing my children into a family that's not healthy, and we're always resentful, and so on, still not a reason. So become healthy. And we go back, we're not tampering with matters that are not something we should tamper with. Blessings. God forbid, blessings. Again, I'm not here to tell anyone how many children to have. It's between you and your husband or wife, and between you and God. But since we're on the topic, consider this, that God has given us the greatest blessing of all to be able to bring another generation to the world. If our parents made the same cheshbonos, same calculations that some people make today, we may never have been here to even talk about it. So it's a matter of understanding your priorities. Yes, financial worries, it's an issue. But I would not say we deprive ourselves of life and of blessings as a result of the challenges we have. I think if anyone does have a challenge, find yourself a sensitive, compassionate person you can speak to and address it. Maybe there's things the community has to do to help people who have more family members. Thank God in some countries, including the United States, you get a child credit, which just means, I'm not saying it's enough, but at least they respect the idea of children. There are countries where they actually give you credit for not having children. Again, antithetical to Jewish thinking. Because at the end of the day, it's about faith in God. It's a faith that we will be going to Mashiach. And let me ask you something. Would you rather walk with 4 children to Mashiach or with 17 children? It's about a matter of understanding that a family unit brings more love to each other. One of the things I remember also that stood out from the Rebbe saying that when a family has a large, I think the Rebbe even said, Yud Beis Shvatim, which means 12 children, boys or girls, they also become support to each other because you have different people with different attitudes. So you have an internal support system all built in, flesh and blood. And again, I don't recall if the Rebbe said this exactly, but I thought to myself at the time that has an element also of financial opportunity. The likelihood with a family of 10, 15 children, one person may be successful. And he has right there a network, because after all the children are married, it's double. So let's say 15 children, 30 people. You have right there what they call family and friends, ability to get investment, to get people that you can start a business with, and so on. So no one can have to underestimate the value that comes out of children. It's tremendous. I want to share a story. There was a couple in New York City that came to see me, very well-to-do, very successful. And they came to see me. Then they wanted to know, they had 3 cats and 4 dogs, I don't remember, something like that. Why do they want to see me? They want to know whether they're considering having a child, and what do I think? So I said, have a child. Why are you asking me this question? What's the question? It's the greatest blessing. They said, it's very expensive. I couldn't control myself from laughing. Very expensive. They trust me, they have no issue at all with the money part. But, expense is an expense. Now, she happened to be an actuary. So I said, how expensive? I was just like playing along. She says, well, calculations are today that by the age 25, everything included, from pregnancy, through clothing, through education, and everything else, medical bills, etc., a child can be $2.5 million. And by the time they're age 35, they begin returning the investment, and after they repay their school loans, etc., etc. Okay, very interesting. So I was thinking, what should I say? So I said to them, well, let me invite you for a Shabbos to a family. And I invited them to a home without telling them that the home had 17 children. They come for Shabbos, and I came to eat there as well. And I didn't say anything. And they're there Friday night. And as the meal begins, the kids start coming. Now, some of the kids were already married, and they weren't there anymore. But there was enough kids to make an impression. One kid, another kid, another kid. By Kiddush, you already have 12, 13 kids there. And as they come down, the couple is amazed, and they keep asking. They say, who are these kids? They thought maybe friends came over to eat, etc. Because where they live in New York City, in the perimeter of 5 miles, I don't think they see 15 kids in 3 families even. Anyway, the father and mother tell them, it's our kids. So they say, from how many marriages? They said, 1 marriage. No twins, all healthy. And the mother happens to be an educator, happens to be a very fine person and very educated and well put together. So she's not some harried housewife. And they were very impressed. The children were very giving. Asked the question, how could you spread love to 17 children? The mother said, very simple, it's like the sun. The same sun is reflected in 17 drops of water as in 1 drop, or in 17,000 drops. They couldn't believe it. How many children? 17 children. So I leaned over to the couple and I said, so
You're an actuary. 17 times 2.5 million. How much does that make? Suffice it to say, this couple today has 4 beautiful children. It was a big lesson in their lives. Now again, I didn't suggest there aren't challenges. And we all know it's tzar gidul banim. There's challenges in bringing up children. But there's another challenge, which is being healthy human beings and fulfilling our mission in this world. And that cannot be underestimated. That's the biggest and most important thing that we have to look at. Now, being that the time is close to tight, we're going to do one more question. I'm going to defer that one to the next week about the roles of male and female. That was going to be the next topic. And we will, and as well as making Tanya practical, let me just say as a conclusion, it's an honor to share a few words every week with you. It's an honor that you spend your time listening to this, and hopefully I'm able to do justice to what Chassidus and Torah came to us to be given to this earth, and that is to be made practical, applicable, empower us to be the best we can possibly be. And our challenge is to look at whatever we look at in Torah, in Chassidus, and say, ask yourself 2 questions. How is that relevant to me? And how can that be personalized in my life? Those 2 questions, if you ask it, will get you a long way to almost all issues. Unfortunately, we weren't taught to ask those questions. So I'm encouraging every one of us to ask those questions. So you've been listening to Simon Jacobson, to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 15. Please write your questions to us at meaningfullife.com/MyLifeLive. And until next Sunday, from 8 to 9 p.m., everyone should have a very beautiful, meaningful, and blessed week.